Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Michael Thompson, 38, never imagined his quiet life would change in an instant. A father of two adorable children, Tyler and Samantha, and loving husband to Laura, he led a simple but happy existence in the small town of Riverwood, known for its quiet streets and supportive neighbors. That Monday morning, Michael was getting ready to open his garage, his small mechanic shop, when everything changed. Sirens wailed in the street, and before he could even comprehend what was happening, two police officers were standing in front of him. "Michael Thompson? You're under arrest," one of them announced coldly. Laura stood outside the window, watching her husband being handcuffed before their children's helpless eyes. Michael protested, but his words were lost in the frigid morning air. He hadn't done anything. Nothing. And yet, he was accused of a violent robbery at a local jewelry store, a crime he'd never committed. In the courtroom, the verdict came swiftly: 25 years in prison. Judge Helen Crawford, known for her severity and lack of compassion, listened to no defense, no explanation. Michael was condemned, and with him, the dreams and peace of mind of his entire family were shattered. But what the town didn't know was that behind this unjust conviction lay a secret. A determined lawyer, David Reynolds, was willing to do anything to set the record straight. And what he had in mind would change Michael's life, and Riverwood's, forever. Michael Thompson had barely opened his garage door when blaring sirens echoed down the street. Before he could even comprehend what was happening, two police officers, clearly in a hurry and serious, approached him. "Michael Thompson? You're under arrest for robbery and complicity in burglary," one of them said, his voice cold and final. Michael took a step back, his heart pounding. "Wait. I didn't do anything. You're wrong." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The other officer took out his handcuffs and snapped them around his wrists. Inside the house, his wife, Laura, was paralyzed with fear. She watched Michael being escorted to the police car, while 12-year-old Tyler and 9-year-old Samantha wept silently. Neighbors came out of their houses in shock, whispering to each other, "Michael? But, this can't be." At the police station, Michael was interrogated. Each question seemed more absurd than the last. He explained that he had spent the morning preparing orders for his garage, that he had never set foot in the jewelry store targeted in the robbery. But the police ignored his explanations, convinced of his guilt because a surveillance camera had supposedly identified him, evidence that, in reality, showed a completely different man. Meanwhile, Laura contacted a court-appointed lawyer, but he seemed overwhelmed by the situation. Michael was taken to court the next day, exhausted and broken, without having had time to process the nightmare. The courtroom was cold and imposing. Judge Helen Crawford, known for her severity, stared at him with a mixture of contempt and indifference. Michael tried to defend himself, explaining that he was innocent, that he had witnesses and evidence. But the judge, implacable, raised her hand and delivered the verdict. 25 years in prison. A heavy silence fell over the room. Michael's children, sitting at the back, burst into tears, and Laura felt the floor give way beneath her feet. She knew their lives had just changed forever. At that moment, Michael understood that injustice could strike anyone, and that the fight for his freedom was only just beginning. But what he didn't know yet was that a determined lawyer, David Reynolds, was already preparing a plan to set the record straight and change the course of his destiny. The day after the trial, the town of Riverwood seemed frozen in an oppressive silence. Residents whispered in cafes and on the sidewalks, "How could a man everyone liked be sentenced to 25 years in prison for a crime he never committed?" In the courtroom, Michael, still in shock, tried to comprehend what had just happened. His hands trembled through the handcuffs, and his gaze kept falling on Laura and the children, who watched him in silent pain. The court-appointed lawyer, an inexperienced man named Tom Reynolds, no relation to David Reynolds, seemed overwhelmed by the gravity of the case. He stammered, hesitated to ask questions, and failed to address any of the glaring inconsistencies in the case. Witnesses who might have exonerated Michael weren't even heard. Judge Helen Crawford remained impassive, her hard eyes staring at Michael as if he had already been guilty from the start. Every word the defendant spoke seemed to fall into an abyss of silence and coldness. Laura, sitting at the back of the room, felt her anger and frustration rising. She wanted to scream, shout that her husband was innocent, but her voice remained blocked. Tyler and Samantha, clutching their hands, wept silently, unable to understand how the world could be so cruel. Outside, neighbors who had followed the trial through the local media murmured, "It's a disgrace. Michael is a good man." But their murmurs seemed insignificant compared to the judicial machine that had just crushed the life of an innocent man. Michael was taken to Riverwood Prison, a gray, imposing building where time seemed to stand still. The cells were cramped, the lights cold, and every sound, the slamming of doors, the murmuring of guards, was a cruel reminder of his situation. Yet amidst this despair, a glimmer of hope appeared. A renowned lawyer, David Reynolds, had been informed of the case. Known for his tenacity and unorthodox methods, he saw in this case not only an opportunity to save an innocent man, but also to expose the flaws and corruption of the system. That night, Michael lay on his prison bed, thinking about his family, his life, and the freedom that had been taken from him. He didn't know it yet, but his fight was only just beginning, a fight that would expose every injustice and reveal those who had tried to destroy his life. A few days after the verdict, as Michael struggled to maintain some semblance of dignity behind bars, an unexpected visitor arrived at the detention center, David Reynolds, a renowned lawyer known for his boldness. Laura was the first to meet David in the lobby of the detention center. She immediately sensed his energy and determination. Tall, elegant, with a piercing gaze that seemed to read the depths of souls, he extended his hand to Laura. "I'm here for Michael Thompson," he said calmly. "And I intend to prove that he's innocent." Laura, tears in her eyes, felt a hope she hadn't felt since the day of the trial. "Do you really think he can get out of prison, after everything that's happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. David nodded. "I'm not saying it will be easy. But there are holes in his case, and I intend to exploit them. I will not let an innocent man lose 25 years of his life for a crime he didn't commit." A few hours later, David entered Michael's cell for the first time. Michael, weary and tired, stared at him. "Michael Thompson?" David asked, holding out his hand. Michael grabbed it, still surprised to see a lawyer of this stature taking an interest in his case. "You're here to help me?" he stammered. "Absolutely," David replied confidently. "And I'm not just going to help you, I'm going to bring you back to your family. But to do that, I'm going to have to dig deep and expose the whole truth behind this conviction." David immediately began reviewing Michael's case. He pored over every document, every witness statement, and every surveillance video. He quickly detected glaring inconsistencies, evidence ignored, witnesses never interviewed, and, most importantly, a lack of logic in the way the charges had been brought. He explained to Michael that the truth was often hidden by those who wanted to protect their interests, but that if they could demonstrate these manipulations, they could not only prove his innocence, but also reveal those responsible for this injustice. Michael felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The road would be long and fraught, but for the first time since his arrest, he felt that justice might finally be served. David, for his part, knew that this case would become more than just a trial. It was a fight against the system, a fight for the truth, and he was ready to do anything to win it. David Reynolds didn't waste a minute. The very next day, he dove into Michael's case with obsessive precision. Every police report, every witness statement, every surveillance video was analyzed from every angle. He quickly noticed anomalies that no one else had noticed. First, there was the video from the jewelry store the night of the robbery. Police had claimed it showed Michael escaping with the loot. But upon closer inspection, David saw that the man in the video was much taller and wearing a different jacket. The footage had been edited to appear convincing, and no one had questioned the store owner about this obvious mistake. Then there were the witnesses. Several people had seen a suspicious man in the neighborhood that evening, but their statements had been ignored or misrecorded by the investigation. David wrote down every name, every detail, knowing they could become crucial in proving Michael's innocence. Finally, a name began to emerge: Richard Holloway, a wealthy and influential businessman from Riverwood. Holloway had ties to some of the people in charge of the investigation and would have a vested interest in diverting attention from his own shady activities. David immediately sensed that Holloway might be the key to understanding why Michael had been falsely accused. David then went to the jewelry store, questioned the staff, and reviewed the security footage again. Every detail reinforced his belief: Michael was innocent. The evidence had been manipulated to create a scapegoat, and the man behind it all was still at large, protected by his influence. In the evening, David met with Michael and Laura to share his findings. "Michael, Laura, there's something you need to know," he said, placing several photos and documents on the table. "Everything indicates Michael wasn't there. And someone orchestrated everything to convict him." Michael, his eyes wide, felt a shiver of hope. "You mean, someone really wanted to pin this on me?" David nodded. "Exactly. But we're going to prove it. And when we do, Michael, everything will change." For the first time in weeks, Michael felt he was no longer alone. The battle for his freedom had begun, and David was willing to do anything to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing the most powerful men in Riverwood. David Reynolds knew that winning this case wouldn't be easy. Simply presenting the evidence wouldn't be enough. He had to strike hard, surprise the judge, and expose the extent of the manipulation. He began to develop a bold, almost risky, but necessary strategy to save Michael. First, he established a detailed timeline of the night of the robbery, comparing every witness statement, every video, and every report overlooked by the initial investigation. Every inconsistency was carefully noted, ready to be exposed in public. Next, he contacted the ignored witnesses: the neighbor who had seen Holloway prowling near the jewelry store, a security guard who had noticed the suspicious man walking away with a bag, and even a customer present that evening, whose testimony could contradict the official version. Each of them agreed to cooperate, shocked by the injustice Michael had suffered. David also knew he had to prepare a dramatic twist for the courtroom. It wasn't just about proving Michael's innocence. He had to expose Richard Holloway and show how his influence had sidetracked the investigation. To do this, he gathered financial documents, correspondence, and evidence linking Holloway to several police officers and manipulated witnesses. Finally, David met with Michael and his family to explain the plan. "Michael, Laura, listen carefully," he began, his gaze piercing. "We're not just going to challenge the verdict. We're going to show the truth, and everyone will know who tried to destroy your life. But you have to be prepared. It will be intense, and some will be furious." Michael felt a mixture of fear and hope. "I'm ready," he said. "I just want to get out of this prison and see my family again." Laura took his hand. "We're with you, Michael. We'll never give up." David smiled slightly. "Good. Then get ready. When we enter the courtroom, we're going to hit where it hurts. The truth will come out, and there will be no turning back." So the plan was put into place. Every piece of evidence, every witness, and every document would be used to turn the tables. The shock would be total, and no one would be able to deny the manipulation and injustice Michael had suffered. The battle for his freedom was only just beginning, but for the first time, Michael felt that victory was no longer an impossible dream. The day of the long-awaited hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed, filled with reporters, curious neighbors, and members of the Thompson family, all eager for the events to come. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with anticipation and tension. David Reynolds walked in confidently, wearing his dark suit and his determined gaze. Michael, sitting beside him, felt his heart pounding. Laura squeezed his hand, conveying courage and comfort. From the very first minutes, David laid the foundations of his attack. He challenged the credibility of the evidence presented at the first trial and challenged Judge Helen Crawford, demanding that every video and testimony she had ignored be examined. The judge, surprised by this direct and bold approach, frowned. "Your Honor," David began, his voice clear and firm, "we have uncovered evidence that no one considered at the first hearing. This evidence demonstrates that my client, Michael Thompson, was not present at the scene of the robbery and that another individual, protected by his influence, is truly responsible." David then turned to the witnesses. Each of them recounted what they had seen, what they knew, and how their statements had been ignored. Murmurs rose in the room as the contradictions with the original trial became evident. Then David revealed the original videos from the jewelry store. Every detail was compared to the prosecution's claims: the man's height, his clothing, his gait, everything pointed to the man not being Michael. Judge Crawford remained silent, visibly disturbed by the evidence unfolding before her. "Your Honor," David continued, "Michael Thompson was wrongly convicted. The truth is clear. And it is time for justice." The audience, previously silent, erupted into murmurs and exclamations. The journalists frantically took notes, sensing that a legal scandal was unfolding. Michael, his eyes shining with emotion, felt an immense weight lifted from his shoulders. But David knew the hardest part was yet to come, identifying and exposing the man who had orchestrated this whole manipulation. And he was ready to go all the way. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. David Reynolds, calm and methodical, approached the barrister's desk with a thick file in his hands. All eyes were on him. Even Judge Helen Crawford seemed on edge, aware that what was about to happen next could turn the entire trial upside down. "Your Honor," David began, "it's time to name the real person responsible for this theft and show how he manipulated the investigation to convict an innocent man." He then called a key witness, Richard Holloway, the influential businessman everyone in the city respected and feared. Holloway, who thought he could remain in the shadows, was forced to take his place in the witness box under the watchful eye of the court. David laid out, evidence after evidence, how Holloway had orchestrated the robbery to divert attention from his own shady dealings. He showed correspondence, recordings, and witnesses confirming that Holloway had influenced certain police officers and manipulated surveillance videos to frame Michael. Holloway, at first arrogant, tried to deny it, but David was relentless. Every piece of evidence he presented seemed to nail Holloway, and the audience began to murmur, stunned by the extent of the manipulation. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, his voice echoing through the room, "Michael Thompson was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by a powerful man. The evidence is clear, the witnesses are present, and justice can no longer turn a blind eye." Judge Crawford, visibly uncomfortable, tried to remain calm, but it was clear that the full picture of injustice had been revealed. Michael felt his heart race. For the first time since his arrest, he knew he was going to be released. The audience erupted in murmurs of amazement and admiration for David's courage and Michael's resilience. Reporters immortalized every moment, knowing that this case would make headlines across the state. Michael finally felt hope reborn. The truth was out, and the person who had tried to destroy his life would no longer be able to hide behind their influence. The path to freedom was now clear, and no one would be able to ignore the injustice he had suffered. The long-awaited day finally arrived. Michael Thompson was led into court, no longer as a defendant, but as an innocent man ready to regain his freedom. The courtroom was filled with reporters, friends, neighbors, and family members, all eagerly awaiting the events that were about to unfold. David Reynolds, sure of his plan, stood by his side, ready to ensure everything went smoothly. Michael, his heart pounding, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Every step toward leaving the courthouse seemed to bring him closer to a new life. Judge Helen Crawford, visibly embarrassed, finally pronounced the official acquittal. Michael Thompson is found innocent of all charges against him. He is immediately released. A shocked silence followed his words, before the room erupted in cheers. Reporters were taking pictures and recording every moment. Michael, his eyes brimming with tears, turned to Laura and the children. Tyler and Samantha ran to him, hugging him, while Laura burst into tears of joy. "Dad!" Samantha shouted. "You're finally here." "I'm here, my darlings." "I'm finally here," Michael whispered, his voice trembling but full of happiness. Outside, neighbors and Riverwood residents cheered Michael, admiring his strength and courage. Television cameras captured the moment, immortalizing the scene of an innocent man freed after a shocking injustice. For Michael, freedom was bittersweet. He was reunited with his family and his life, but the lost years and the injustice he suffered left deep scars. Yet he knew that today marked the beginning of a new chapter. David Reynolds, watching Michael melt into his family's embrace, felt immense satisfaction. He had kept his promise, the truth had triumphed, and an innocent man had regained his dignity. And as the cameras turned off and the crowd dispersed, Michael realized that, despite everything he had been through, he was finally free to rebuild his life, free to dream again, and free to never again let injustice define his destiny. Michael Thompson's release sent shockwaves through the small town of Riverwood. Residents, shocked by the injustice he had suffered, began to question the credibility and integrity of the local justice system. The once steadfast Judge Helen Crawford was immediately placed under investigation. Her past decisions, her rigidity, and her refusal to examine ignored evidence were scrutinized. Several police officers involved in the initial investigation were also summoned, some accused of negligence or complicity with Richard Holloway. Richard Holloway, publicly humiliated and discredited, faced legal action and massive community outrage. His once impeccable reputation crumbled within days, and he became an example of corrupting influence and abuse of power in the city. Michael, meanwhile, gradually returned to his family life. Tyler and Samantha, still scarred by fear and pain, began to smile again as they saw their father present at every moment. Laura, strong and resilient, supported Michael in his rebuilding, aware that the trials they had gone through had made them closer than ever. David Reynolds, meanwhile, became a local hero. His tenacity and keen sense of justice not only saved Michael, but also exposed the flaws in a system that could crush innocent people. He was invited to lectures and appear on television to talk about the case, inspiring others facing injustice to fight back. The town of Riverwood, now aware of the dangers of influence and corruption, began implementing reforms to protect its citizens. Residents held community meetings, discussed ways to ensure transparency in the justice system, and pledged to no longer allow injustice to prevail. For Michael, despite the scars of his past, it was a moment of rebirth. He understood that truth and justice could triumph, even in the face of the most powerful obstacles. And with his family by his side, he was ready to turn the page and rebuild his life on solid foundations. A few weeks after his release, Michael Thompson and his family were beginning to return to normal life, but the experience had left an indelible mark. The lost years, the humiliations, and the fear of injustice had transformed their perception of the world. Yet Michael refused to let these trials define his future. With the help of David Reynolds, he decided to turn his pain into strength. Together, they founded the Thompson Reynolds Foundation for Justice, an organization dedicated to helping innocent people wrongfully convicted, exposing flaws in the justice system, and providing legal support to families who have suffered injustice. The town of Riverwood, which had been following the case closely, celebrated the initiative. Residents and journalists attended the foundation's opening, expressing their admiration for Michael's courage and David's integrity. Local and national media covered the event, inspiring thousands of people across the country. Michael, looking at his family at his side, felt a sense of peace and pride he had never known before. Tyler and Samantha laughed and played around him, Laura placed her hand tenderly on his shoulder, and he knew they had survived the darkness to reach the light. David, watching Michael, smiled. "You have come through the shadows to reach the light, Michael. This is not just your victory, it is the victory of justice." Michael nodded. "And this is just the beginning. We will fight for all those who have yet to regain their freedom. We will never again let injustice destroy innocent lives." The town of Riverwood, now more aware and vigilant, had learned a valuable lesson: even in the face of corruption and injustice, truth can triumph through courage, perseverance, and those who dare to stand up for what is right. Thus ended the story of Michael Thompson, a man wrongfully convicted, but who, thanks to the tenacity of his lawyer and his own resilience, regained his freedom, his family, and his dignity. And, most importantly, he turned his personal struggle into a weapon against injustice, offering a second chance to those who, like him, had been broken by a broken system.